Hi guys, this is Hero. How's everyone doing today? आज बता केम छो आज सब कैसे हो? So today I'm going over how to interpret a new moon in a chart, right? Whether this be in your own chart, somebody you knows, or a chart for a certain day and time, right? If there's a new moon on a chart, how would you see it, right? Or how would you analyze just a person's behavior in general if you see that they have a new moon in their chart, right? Now, first of all, how do you know if there's a new moon in the chart? Well, a new moon is basically whenever the moon is within about 5 or 10 degrees of the sun, right? Especially if the moon is in front of the sun and the closer it is. So, for example, if the moon is like within 5 degrees in front of the sun, it's very strong, right? Because the moon is real close to the sun and the moon is also approaching the sun. Okay, so the effects are super strong here. Now, the moon is what? The moon is your emotions and the sun is your mind, right? So whenever the ego is influencing or tampering with your emotions, there's all kinds of effects that can happen, right? Um, there's there's some actual intuitive benefits indirectly gained, right? Why? Because if your emotions, and I've said this before, the emotions themselves are not really a bad thing, right? Because we just don't like them because emotions bring to light our attachments, right? If we're really emotional about something, it's probably because we have some kind of superficial attachment towards them. And the ego loves is the home of attachments, and which is the sun, and the moon, the emotional mind is your emotions. So if your emotions are under rule of the ego, your attachments are going to be brought to light a lot more prevalent, right? So if you or someone has a new moon in their chart, because of this, indirectly, you could be a little bit more intuitive, right? This this is how it's indirectly making you more intuitive, right? And then there's also a direct way this new moon makes you more intuitive, right? The sun and the moon naturally are, I guess you can say, the two biggest um superficial parts of you. I don't want to say superficial, that's not the right word, but the two biggest, you could say the two biggest energies that are a part of you, right? And this is one of the reasons why neither of them go retrograde. Now, whenever they're in the same spot or in a very in the same area, kind of, your awareness in that area has no choice but to increase dramatically, right? And whenever, see, the whole zodiac belt, it functions in unison. It's not just like, oh, there's this part, there's that part. No, it's a one big flow. So if you increase the awareness in one area, you one increase awareness in that one area, and then two, naturally as a byproduct, you increase awareness throughout the rest of the zodiac belt, right? So this is why, for example, on new moons and even full moons, because in a full moon the sun and the moon are aspecting each other, you could feel some more intuitive energies and things like that, and it's a great time for meditation. But if somebody has this in their chart, like I said, indirectly and directly, they could be a little bit more intuitive, right? Some other behaviors, right? So if the moon is under threat from the ego, or your emotions are under threat from the ego, there are some things that could also bleed out character wise. That could be the desire to be isolated, being a little bit pessimistic, right? Because your ego loves swaying to extremes, right? Especially the negative extreme, right? So if your ego is completely, dominating your emotions, you're kind of going to want to be by yourself a little bit more, or you could kind of swing to extremes, right? Where you're by yourself, but then all of a sudden you're out doing all this kind of crazy sudden partying or something like that, right? Um, I mean, you have to see exactly like where it is, what sign it is, whatever, if it's with something else. But in general, it could swing to extremes more on the negative extreme, right? So, in the sense of you want to be a little bit more isolated, possibly a little bit more pessimistic. Um, Emotions themselves could be a little bit more ungrounded, so that could lead to um, some things like anger and things like that. Um, Anxiety, things like that. But all of these things have a really bad connotation to them, and I completely understand why. But the thing you have to understand is that all of these things are clues to our attachment, right? We, in general, don't really like awareness, right? We don't like being aware of our attachments. Why? Because that forces us to have to do something about them. But even though a new moon could be a little bit hard, right? Especially because, you could have more awareness compared to your peers or things like that. This increase in awareness, yes, it will have some of these effects that I've described in the video, but these effects are doing absolutely nothing but to increase your spiritual elevation and get you closer to realizing the spiritual truth of this human birth. Okay. Um, So if you're a little bit more isolated, you're not as, I guess you can say plugged into whatever else other people are doing. That's completely fine. If you are a little bit more pessimistic, right, at times, that's also a little bit okay. Or if you feel like you're just way more in tune or tapped in or intuitive, again, also not a bad thing. I've also just kind of scratched the surface a little bit, right? There's like, you guys know, right? If your emotions are clouded by the ego, how that plays out, either directly or indirectly, right? This kind of unfolding would be there for a person who has a new moon, right? But um, just realize that this is actually who they are internally. So there is great spiritual benefit long term for these people. Okay. Uh, Regardless of superficially how it could appear or they could appear. Okay. But I think that's going to be it for this video. So if you have any questions or comments, you can feel free to let me know. And until next time, I'll talk to everyone later. Thank you all very, very much for watching.